All right, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Torah Studies. My friends, this is a very special edition of Torah Studies because today is Gimel Tammuz, the third day of Tammuz, which is the yahrzeit of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. In fact, it's a milestone yahrzeit, 30 years. You got it? Oh, good. Yeah, 30 years. 30 years since the Rebbe's passing. I mentioned this in my remarks on Sunday morning. We had a special brunch with a guest speaker. I mentioned that in Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, it says that 30, the number 30 or the age 30 is associated with koach, which is strength. And we'll see tonight how the number 40 plays a role, which is highly significant in Jewish thought. 40 days Moses was on the mountain to get the Torah at Sinai, and there are other significant associations with the number 40. But 30 is about power and about strength. And certainly we see today that the Rebbe's message about loving our fellow as ourselves and really, extending and being there for each other is stronger than ever. And so I think on this day, it's certainly appropriate to get together to study Torah, but also to think about good resolutions for sharing that inspiration forward, because after all, that is collectively the message about not just gaining inspiration, but sharing it and generating more light than was before we came into the picture. Okay, so then on that note, I want to tell you a story. The story goes that once upon a time there was a traveling caravan. Okay, the caravan was traveling west. Can you imagine this caravan, bunch of people traveling west? Maybe they were headed to California for the gold rush. We were back in the day, right? Back in the day, they traveled west to find gold. The problem is that the individuals on this caravan, they did not anticipate how long and how difficult this journey would be. And so, although they packed provisions, at some point, they ran out of provisions, and there they are in the middle of the heat, right? Maybe it wasn't as hot as it is in 2024, but it was still very hot, and they didn't have any water, they didn't have any food, and they were in trouble. And then they see in the distance a tree, and under the tree, there's an old man with a beard, and he looks Jewish. This caravan, they were not Jews, but they certainly recognized what looked like an old Jew maybe from Europe who had immigrated somehow to these United States in middle America, middle of nowhere. Anyway, so the leader of the caravan gets out of the caravan, and he stumbles and makes his way over to the Jew. And he says, "Can you tell me, please? We're dying of thirst. We have no food. Can you tell me, please, where can we get provisions? Where can we get more food and more water?" And the old man says, strokes his beard. He says, if you go over the next sand dune or over the next, embankment, whatever it is, and then make a right, etc. So there is a place, there's a small town and small general store where you can get provisions. So the problem is you don't want to go there because there's a bacon tree. There's a bacon tree. So I says, a bacon tree? He says, yeah, a bacon tree. The fellow goes back to the caravan and reports his findings. He says, spoke to the guy. The guy says that there are provisions, but not to go there because of a bacon tree. What's a bacon tree? This guy doesn't know what he's talking about, like a bacon tree. Number one, that's weird. Number two, it's like, yeah, for maybe a Jew, bacon is not kosher. But for us, a bacon tree, the more the merrier. Hey, if bacon grows on trees, we're all in. Anyway, they go over the embankment. They make a right, and they head over to where they see the provisions are up ahead. But wouldn't you know it, right as they were approaching their source of hope, they were attacked by a bunch of highway robbers, and they were fleeced of every possession. They didn't have any food or water, but anything of value that they had, these highway bandits, they stole everything. Unbelievable. Pain on top of the hunger. This guy goes back to the Jew. He says, "How did you send me into this trap?" And the Jewish guy says, "I told you not to go there." He said, "Yeah, but you said not to go there because of a bacon tree." The Jew says, "Bacon tree, ham bush, What's the difference? Okay, my friends, that was that was bad. That was a very elaborate opening. Today we're going to talk about an ambush. And not a hambush, not a bacon tree, but an actual ambush. And the ambush that we're talking about is the ambush that takes place, the attempted ambush that takes place in this week's Torah portion, which is Parshat Chukat. Now, let me give you a little bit of background on the Torah portion. So number one, here's what you need to know. Number one, the Torah portion opens up by talking about the laws of the red heifer. The red heifer was an animal. Obviously, it's a heifer. It's a cow. It was specifically used to purify an individual from ritual impurity that was that happened through coming in contact with a corpse. Somebody comes in contact with a dead body, so the only way out of that impurity is through the process of purification, utilizing a red heifer. And the Torah opens this week's portion with a discussion about that. Then it talks about what happened when Miriam passed away. And by the way, I should tell you that at this point in the Torah portion, the narrative jumps 40 years ahead. Remember last week, or actually 2 weeks ago, we read about the story of the spies and how God said for the next 40 years, y'all ain't going into the land. You're going to make you're going to be in a holding pattern until this generation dies out. The next generation will go into the land. Well, the Torah kind of fast forwards over those, I don't know, I guess it's about 39 years to the end of the 40 years. And this is where the story picks up in this week's Torah portion. Miriam, the sister of Moses and Aaron, passes away. Shortly thereafter, Aaron passes away. There's a kerfuffle that happens with a snake attack and the healing that happens. The people were complaining about the manna, and God sends poisonous snakes, venomous snakes to attack the people. And then God tells Moses to put a snake wrapped around the pole as a sign to pray to God, and that brings healing. And by the way, to this very day, the American Medical Association, their logo is a pole with a snake wrapped around it, and that comes from this week's Torah portion, which talks about the healing power of the copper snake on a pole. I mean, God, but that was the symbol to look up. Okay, then the Torah tells us in very cryptic terms about the miracle that happened at Arnon. Now, what happened at Arnon was there was an attempted ambush against the Jewish people, and a miracle happened. But before I tell you about Arnon, let's talk about another famous ambush that happened in modern Jewish history in the land of, with Israel in its wars against Egypt. Now, these wars happened in 1956, 1967, and 1973. The story that I'm about to share happened in 1956. So what we're going to do is we're going to read this from the text. This is actually a book called Warrior. It's a book about Israeli wars and warriors. And this talks about a story, an ambush that happened in the Sinai Desert at the Mitla Pass. Just so you know what the Mitla Pass is, it's basically a 20-mile pass, narrow space that you can traverse. And on either side are very high walls, mountain ranges, with walls as high as 1,600 feet, the narrow passageway in between, which makes it susceptible to, you guessed it, bacon trees. I'm kidding, to ambushes. So we're going to jump in. Toba, are you up to reading this one? All right, hold on one second. Let me share it with our online crew. And here we go. Take it away, please.
Oh, excuse me. The pilots reported that the pass seemed empty. I didn't expect opposition inside Mitla Pass. The jets flying over that morning had seen nothing other than burned-out trucks. Mota Gur, commander of the paratroopers, left. But within a mile of the entrance, the first half-truck was slammed by a volley of fire high on the defile walls. The driver was killed instantly, and the half-track swerved sideways and stopped. The second half-track moved up and was also hit and stopped. Mota Gur was on the spot, but he had no question about what to do. He moved in, and as he did, he was drawn into battle with an entire Egyptian infantry battalion that had dug themselves into the ledges and caves of the cliff walls and had not been noticed by our planes. The battle was raging, with Motagur still pinned down. The reconnaissance unit skirted the cliffs on the right side, hoping to come down on the Egyptians from above. But when they got to the ridge, they were hit by a hail of bullets from the caves and hidden ledges on the far side. Unable to identify the source of fire, they assumed it was coming from below them and stormed down the wall. Here, some of them fell to their death, while others were caught by fire from the positions below as well as from those opposite them.
So here you have a real life situation that's happened in 1956, where the Israeli army is moving through the Sinai Desert, and they think that this Mitla Pass, right, the Mitla Pass, they think that it's clear, but truth is there were Egyptian infantry battalion. There were soldiers, army folk that were embedded in the caves overlooking the pass, and classic ambush. And the Israeli army, they were really trying to figure out what's going on in real time, where it's coming from, and how to neutralize the threat. Okay, this parallels the story in this week's Torah portion, and that's really what this is about, which is the attempted ambush in the Arnon Valley. So just to explain, I mentioned before that the Torah portion really picks up the narrative at the end of the 40 years. And I mean, legit, it just cuts 40 years later. It's like, imagine you're watching a video and the screen comes up, 40 years later, boom. And the story just literally, the narrative picks up, and this is what's going on. And so at that point, the Jewish people are headed toward the promised land. And the Torah says how they want to go through the land of Moab, because that's a direct route. And the Moabites say, no, you can't pass through. And so they go around, whatever it is. But the Jewish people are making their final approach into the land. And they're going through this place called this place along the Arnon River. And it's at that point that the narrative picks up. Okay, so Toba, if you don't mind to do one more, you want me to open this up?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we'll do one more for right now. This is text 1b, and here Rashi explains what was going on with this ambush, attempted ambush.
The Amorites were lying in wait. There were two towering mountains with a deep, narrow gorge between them. The cliff wall stood so close that a man could stand on one side and talk to his friend on the other side. The walking trail ran through this gorge. When the Jews entered the Amorite lands through this canyon, the Amorites intended to emerge from the caves in the mountains above and kill them with arrows and catapulted boulders.
I mean, very similar to what happened in Egypt. Now, how did these two stories play out? So I'm going to read these texts 2a and 2b. So let's read text 2a. This goes back to what happened in 1956 in the Sinai Desert with the Egyptian army embedded in the cliff walls. So here's what happened. Text 2a. By this time, the enemy positions had been located. Now, by this time means after a little while. And after nightfall, two small units were sent along the cliff walls. Moving slowly along the cliff face, they attacked one Egyptian cave and firing hole after another in hand-to-hand fighting. For 2 hours, the sounds of battle reverberated through the pass before finally giving away around 8 o'clock to an ominous silence. When morning came, it was evident that the battle in the pass was over. From the caves and recesses where the Egyptians had been, there was no movement. Inside them, 260 Egyptian soldiers lay dead. Whatever survivors there might have been had slipped away during the night. But 38 paratroopers had also been killed. 38 Israeli paratroopers, 260 Egyptian soldiers, and that was the horrible battle that happened at the Mitla Pass in the Sinai Desert in 1956. What happened in our Torah portion? Right, we read before. Toba read before that the Amorites were lying in wait to ambush the Jewish people on their way to Israel, on the way to the Promised Land. They were embedded in the caves. So what happened? So take a look at text 2b. The Torah tells us. Rashi comments on the Torah narrative. He says like this: there were clefts in the mountain on the Moab side of the canyon. So basically, on one side of this gorge, on one side was the Moabite side, and the other one was the Amorite side. So Moab and Amor, the Amori, those were the two sides, the two lands. And in the middle was that narrow pass, beneath these mountains, these tall mountains. So directly Sorry, let me start again. There were clefts in the mountain on the Moab side of the canyon. Directly opposite these clefts on the mountain on the Amorite side, there were protrusions that looked like horns and breasts. So on one side, it went in, and the other side, it went out. What happened? When the Jews prepared to pass through the canyon, the mountain on the side of what would soon be Israel trembled, like a maidservant emerging to greet her mistress, and moved toward the mountain on the side of Moab. So basically, the Amorite side, literally, right? The mountains moved to the other side. Its protrusions entered the clefts on the other mountain, thus killing the Amorites. So the Amorites were hiding in the caves because the caves went in. And then you had these, I mean, just call them spikes, right? The spikes from the other side, the mountains moved together. One side moved to the other, and it crushed the enemy that was lying in wait for the Jews. So even before the Jewish people got there, and I think it's very important to emphasize this, even before the Jews got to that gorge, got to that area where they were going to go through, before they got there, before even the potential to be ambushed, already the mountains closed and the victory was achieved. When I say victory, the enemy was neutralized. Now, how did the Jewish people find out about this? It seems like a bit of something that they might not even know about. So take a look at the next text. All right, so let's read this together. This is going to be text number 3. So the verse says, "From there the blood of the slain flowed into the well." How did this happen? So here we go. God said, "Who will inform my children of these miracles?" The proverb says, "If you give a child bread, inform his or her mother." In other words, you do a good deed, let them know you did a good deed. It's not a bad thing. So how did God let the Jewish people know that he had done this great miracle for them to neutralize an enemy even before they attacked? So after the Jews passed through, the mountains returned to their original location. In other words, I guess the Jewish people passed through on top because there wasn't a passageway in between because the whole thing was collapsed. But after the Jews passed through, the mountains opened back up. The well descended. And by the way, the well descended, which well? This is the well of Miriam, right? That miraculous well that traveled with the Jewish people throughout the 40 years in the desert. So the well descended into the river and brought up the blood, arms, and limbs of the slain and carried them around the Jewish camp. The Jews saw what had happened and sang an ode. They sang a shirah, a song to Hashem, for the great miracle that had happened. So this is how the Jewish people found out that there was a miracle that had happened. And indeed, they sang praises, they sang a song to Hashem, which we'll read a part of the song, or at least the opening, in a moment. But just to get the narrative clear, because it's important, we're going to ask some questions on this. So as the Jews are on their approach to Israel, they're going to need to pass through these 2 mountain ranges. There's an enemy lying in wait. God causes that the enemy is neutralized and destroyed before they can wreak havoc on the Jewish people, 2 million strong, and then facilitates the fact that we should know about the miracle and be able to thank God for the miracle and for the salvation, and that's how the story ends. So it has a happy ending and a happy beginning. Okay, so a few things to point out, and I think these things are very important. So number one, here's one message. The first message is that if you do something kind, let the other person know. Right? Sometimes we want to be very humble. Like, I'll do you a favor, you're not even going to know about it. Let the person know. In this case, the proverb says, if you give bread to a child, let the mother know. It's not just checking for allergies. It's like, it's okay that I gave your kid bread. That's how like a 2024 mind would look at that, right? Check in with the parent before you give. But in the context of what it means is that there's one thing to do something good. There's another thing to share the love and share the kindness so that a person feels blessed by someone else, feels blessed. So if God does miracles, but we don't know that the miracles are happening, then we might not feel overtly God's blessing in our lives. On the other hand, the other message is, how many times do miracles happen that we might not even be aware of? And how grateful we should be going about our day that disasters don't happen. Now, let me explain for a second. It's like, remember that time that you drove to work and nothing happened and everything was calm, right? Do you know what God potentially had to do to make sure that your journey was safe? But we don't always say, oh, thank you, Hashem, for, we don't necessarily do that every time we get into the car and arrive safely at our destination. Maybe we should, because we don't know what happens behind, in the background. We don't know what happens behind the scenes, what God has to facilitate to ensure our safe passage. Now, it doesn't mean that in a rear view mirror we see the wreckage and it's like, oh, thank God I was safe. God forbid, no one should be, no one should be harmed. But I think the point here is that there are miracles that happen all around us. Sometimes we see them. A lot of times we don't. But we shouldn't take life itself for granted. Every blessing that we have, every safe and secure passage that we enjoy, everything should be felt as though it has been, touched by God's blessing. So that's another message. So we have two messages so far. Number one, share the goodness that you do with the recipient. Make sure they know that it's not about you and your ego. It's about making them feel like they're blessed. Number one. Number two, let's recognize that even when we don't clearly see the miracle, life itself is a miracle. Every safe and secure passage, every day of health, etc., we should not take for granted, and we should thank God for that. Okay. And as I said, in response to witnessing the miracle, here's what happens next. Toba, please read this one. Give me 1 second. Let me just pull it up here. This is going to be text number 4a, actually. Text 4a.
At that time, the Israelites sang this ode to God. Ascend, O well, sing to it.
So let me pause here for a quick second. So the Torah says that when the Jewish people recognized the great miracle that the enemy was destroyed before it could destroy them, so they sang a song that begins with Alei ve'er enula, ascend, O well, sing to it. And the Torah continues. There's 3 verses. It's very poetic, very mysterious, very cryptic, but very poetic, about a song that they sang to thank God for this miracle. The Jewish people sang a song. Now, we know, right, famously in the Torah, there's another time that a song was sung. In fact, if you look at the first 2 words here in the Hebrew, I don't know why it's not highlighting properly on my side. In the Hebrew, Az Yashir, right? Az Yashir, that's from this week's Torah portion. Az Yashir Yisrael. Az Yashir Azot, Ale Be'er Enula. Ali Be'er Enula. So that is this week's Torah portion, Az Yashir Yisrael. Then Israel sang. The other time, there's one more time in Torah that we have a shir or a shirah, where a song is sung. And that is the context of the splitting of the sea. When it says, Az Yashir Moshe. Please read this one in English, 4b.
At that time, Moses and the children of Israel sang this ode to God.
So it's almost the same. Now, obviously, the song was different, but the opening is the same. Az Yashir, in the Hebrew, Az Yashir. The only difference, aside from the content of the song, obviously different miracles, different contexts, but the only difference in the opening preamble is that in Exodus, at the splitting of the sea, it says, Az Yashir Moshe Uvnei Yisrael. Then Moses and the children of Israel sang, whereas in our verse, by the miracle of the Arnon ambush, it says, Az Yashir Yisrael. Then Israel sang. And this leads us to 2 questions. Okay, we have 2 questions. Question number 1. Okay, stay with me on the questions because these are going to be very important. Question number 1. Why is it that a song is sung only for these 2 miracles? Many miracles that happen to the Jewish people that we don't find songs being sung. So, for example, I don't know, the 10 plagues. I mean, splitting the sea, yeah, that's when they sang. You had the war against Amalek. You had other wars that the Torah speaks about. And yet we don't find other battles, etc. We don't find that the people break out into song except for 2 places. By A, the splitting of the sea, and B, the story of the miracle of the thwarted ambush at Arnon. Why? What is it about these 2 miracles that evoke a song? First of all, what's a song? What does it mean to sing a song? And why only by these 2 cases? So that's question number 1. Question number 2 is what I pointed out a moment ago, is that why is it that by the splitting of the sea, it says that Moses and the Jewish people sang the song, which implies that it was Moshe who led the song, and the children of Israel, the Jewish people, they followed his lead. Whereas here, his name is not even mentioned. There's no mention of Moses. It says, then Israel sang. What about Moses? What about Moshe? He was one of the guys. He wasn't, he's not mentioned. He's not singled out as leading the song. This leads me to, I think it's not really another question, but another detail I want to point out. The song of our Torah portion, this week's Torah portion, I mentioned before, comprises 3 verses. It's a very short song. Whereas the Song of the Sea is upwards of 18 verses, which means, I'm not trying to be mean or anything here, but it seems like Moses was a bit of a better composer than the children of Israel. Like when he wrote songs, he knew how to write a song. I mean, we say it every day in the tefillah, in the prayers. Every morning we say Az Yasha. It's canonized in the liturgy. We break out, in middle of the morning prayers, we bust out the Song of the Sea. It's so good. We say it every day. It's 18 verses. It's poetic. It's beautiful. I'm not saying this one isn't, but it's only 3 verses. I mean, if anybody knew how to write a song, knew how to compose a song, it's Moses. So why didn't Moses lead this one as well? So we have 2 questions. Again, question number 1, what is it about these 2 miracles specifically that evoke song? And why is it that in this case, Moses didn't lead the song and it was done by the Jewish people at large? Okay, so I want to answer the first question first. What is it about the miracle of the sea and this miracle that evokes song? So I want to frame it like this. If you ask for something, and then somebody responds, you need something, so you ask, and then somebody says, sure, I'll respond and I'll give you what you need. So you have a lot of gratitude because you asked and the other party delivered, and that's a beautiful thing. Sometimes the other party will know what you need even before you ask and give it to you even before the request. But there's an even more subtle form of this. And that is where somebody ensures that all your needs are taken care of without you lifting a finger. It's not like it's not like you're not saying anything. You didn't have to do anything. And they took care of everything. So there's 2 instances in the Torah, and I'm sure you can figure out that it's the 2 that we're talking about, where the Jewish people didn't have to fight, didn't have to lift a finger. When it came to the other battles against Amalek, against other nations, they had to put together soldiers, they had to fight, they had to go to war, wage battle, and then God brought a miraculous victory. But at the sea, the Jewish people didn't do anything. I mean, they prayed to God, but afterwards God said, or at that time God said, hey, you don't need to say anything. I got this. And in the case of our Torah portion, that was by the splitting of the sea in the book of Exodus. And in our Torah portion, in Chukat, where this ambush is lying in wait and God takes care of it before the Jewish people even got there, well, guess what? It's the same concept, right? It's the same concept. And what is that concept? The concept is that you have nothing to worry about. God is taking care of it completely from A to Z without putting in any effort. Take a look at text 5a, just to kind of cement this idea. Take a look at 5a. This is a beautiful verse from the story of the splitting of the sea. This is what God tells Moshe before the sea splits. God says, God will fight for you and you remain silent. That's Hashem's way of saying, hey, listen, I got this. Y'all don't need to ask. You don't need to pray. You don't need to cry. You don't need to scream. You don't need to shout. You don't need to fight. You don't need to do a thing. Hashem yilachim lachem va'atem tacharishon. You just, hang tight. God says, I got this. And this is the key. This is the key to understanding when song applies. When do the Jewish people break out in song? It's when God takes care of things without us needing to do a thing, right? It's when God takes care of the total package. It's like the white glove service. You order something and they're like, okay, you have a few options of delivery. Either we can deliver it to your city. I'm kidding. Or we can deliver it to your front door. or the white glove service will bring it in, like a heavy appliance, we'll bring it in, we'll take out the old washer dryer, we'll put the new one in, and we'll even, I don't know, dust your ceiling fans while we're at it. Like, that's the white glove service. You don't have to do a thing. That's it. Just enjoy the show. This happened by the splitting of the sea. God says, enjoy the show, I got this. That evokes song. And this happened as well in our Torah portion by the miracle at Arnon. Let's take a look at how the Rebbe frames this in text 5b. Okay, take a look. The unique novelty of this miracle was, as the Torah specified, God will fight for you and you remain silent. In other instances of endangerment, our ancestors had to go to war and battle their enemies. Only then, at the sea, did God ensure that the rescue, salvation, and victory. So only then did God ensure their rescue, salvation, and victory in miraculous fashion. And again, it's not just miraculous fashion. There were many miracles that happened, but this is miraculous fashion that they didn't have to do a thing. They didn't have to lift a finger at the split. But here we see, the Rebbe is about to share that in our Torah portion, the story of the thwarted ambush is even greater miracle than the Sea of Reeds. Why? At the splitting of the Sea of Reeds, however, Jews were in a state of silence. They did nothing to save themselves from the Egyptians. God and only God fought off the Egyptians. When God steps in for us and does all the heavy lifting in our stead, he demonstrates his extreme love for us. Not only does he save us from danger, but he also spares us the need to perform even a slight effort. This is why this miracle spurred the Jews to sing an ode to God. The same occurred at the Arnon River. Here too, God saved us in a manner of God will fight for you and you will remain silent. Thus, the miracle also inspired the Jews to sing an ode. However, as I just mentioned, it's even better over here by the Arnon River. It's even greater than the sea. By the way, both of the songs happen at water. I don't know if you noticed that, right? The splitting of the sea and the miracle at the Arnon River when the mountains collapsed on the waiting Amorites. But listen, it's even better in our Torah portion, and that's text 5c. The Rebbe continues. The element of God fighting for you and us not needing to do anything was prevalent in the miracle at Arnon to the extent that the Jews knew neither of the danger nor of the salvation. In other words, God took care of it A to Z to the point that he didn't even stress us out. I'm going to pause here for a moment and explain this. Okay, there's multiple levels here of God's blessing and God's miracle. One level is you feel the danger, you feel the threat, you panic, you pray to God, and God says, hey, listen, you gotta do this, and you make an effort and you work really hard and you fight the good fight, and God blesses your efforts and it works out. God's miracle, your effort, a great partnership. Okay, that's one level. That does that to that type of, in that context, there's no song. Then you have the next level. The next level is where you feel stressed, you feel the threat, you pray to God, and God says, I got this. Just sit back, relax, and enjoy. I got this. I'm going to take care of it. At that point, you say, wow, that's amazing. God is awesome. God really loves me. He didn't even make me lift a finger. That's amazing. But then there's an even deeper level or greater level expression of love where God says, I don't even want to stress you out. If you only knew what was waiting for you in those caves, you would be nervous. And even though I would take care of it, right? And you wouldn't have to lift a finger, but you would panic. I don't want you even to panic. That's how much I love you. I don't want you to even be stressed for a moment. Therefore, I will take care of this without your even knowing it, right? I'm going to take care of the issue before. I'm going to pave the path before you even get there. And when you get there, it's going to look smooth sailing. That's like the miracles I was talking about before, when God takes care of things in advance. We don't even know what kind of miracles went into it. God says, that's how much I love you. That's what the Rebbe says. This is the greatest expression of God's love for us. In every other trial, second paragraph of 5c, in every other trial, Moses either solved the problem or prayed to God for salvation. In this case, salvation was facilitated without Moses' involvement. God did the fighting and the Jews remained silent. This was even true now than at the Sea of Reeds. At the Sea of Reeds, the people were aware of the danger and Moses prayed for them. In this case, God saved them before they even knew of the danger. The people didn't have to stress. Moses didn't have to get involved even. Everything was good. God took care of it. The enemy is there. The enemy is not there. That's it. Done. Okay. I mean, I think we can relate this to modern times. Imagine feeling under threat. Imagine feeling, there's a terrorist plot, whatever. Miraculously gets thwarted. Okay. I mean, wouldn't we all agree that a greater act of love and salvation would be that there should never even be a threat? I mean, that would be amazing to thwart all the threats in advance so that we never feel under danger. That would be amazing. And I think we can pray for that, right? That Israel and Jews should be safe and peace and security should reign in Israel and around the world, and no one should ever feel threatened or attacked. It should all be good. Shalom and peace and security. Okay. So we've answered the first question. We answered the first question of why is it that only on these two occasions in the entire 5 books of Moses, there's only 2 songs that we find. We find the song at the sea and the song here at the miracle at Arnon. What's the common denominator, right? If you have 2 places that have a song, they got to be connected, and something about that evokes a song. And the answer is both of these miracles express the extreme love of God, where God says, I'm going to take care of a white glove service. You don't have to lift a finger. By the sea, God says, quiet, shh, I got this. You're good. Relax, sit back, watch the show. I mean, take your staff, right? Wave it over the sea, but I got this. You don't have to do it. All right. And here, even to a greater extent, God doesn't even tell them about the threat. God says, go to sleep at night, safe and secure. In the morning, I'll let you know, what had been lying in wait, but you're good. I'm not going to stress you out. And so therefore they sing a song. We've answered the first question, but we haven't answered the second question. We might have answered the second question, but let's unpack it. The second question that I asked is, well, why in this case does Moshe not lead the song? Remember I asked that? Like, why by the sea does Moses compose and lead the song? And here it was just the Jewish people as a whole. One answer, which kind of emerges from what we just said, is that by the sea, Moses was involved. I mean, the people panicked and they went to Moses, and Moses went to God, and God tells Moses what to do and what not to do. He says, you're not going to have to do anything. Tell the people it's good. I got this. But you lift your staff and wave it over the water, and then the sea is going to split, etc. So Moses was involved in a leadership form. In this case, by Arnon, Moses didn't facilitate anything any more than anyone else didn't facilitate anything. No one did a thing. They were traveling. They traveled through safe and secure. And when they got to the other side, they realized that there had been an enemy that was lying in wait, that had been thwarted. So Moses played no greater role here than any other Jew. Does that make sense? In other words, in the miracle of our Torah portion, Moses didn't have any greater role than anyone else. Hey, Mark, good to see you. Whereas by the sea, he played a greater role, so therefore he's credited, with writing the song. Okay, that's one answer. I'm going to share with you another answer, and the other answer gets a little bit tricky, because what I failed to tell you before intentionally is that there's another dramatic story that happens in this week's Torah portion. Remember I told you that Miriam passed away in this week's Torah portion, and Aaron? Well, after Miriam passes away, the Torah tells us that the well that had miraculously followed the Jewish people around for 40 years, that well ceased to produce water. And it wasn't a well, it was a rock that kind of, I guess, rolled with them, rock and roll. It kind of rolled with them throughout the 40 years of traveling. And from the rock sprouted water somehow that then, watered and gave enough water for 2 million people. That's quite the rock. So that rock stopped producing water. And the people complained to Moshe. And they say to him, what are we going to do? We have no water. And God tells Moses, speak to the rock, and tell the rock, produce water, and it will. And what does Moses do? He doesn't speak to the rock. What does he do? He hits the rock. He strikes the rock with his staff, and then it produces water. And God says, okay. I told you to speak to the rock, but instead you hit the rock. Because you hit the rock, you are not going to go into the land of Israel. That's it. You will forever be banned. Not forever, but you will not go. You will not lead the Jewish people into Israel. You'll be buried on the other side of the Jordan. Okay? And that happens before the miracle story that we read about, where the ambush was thwarted. So therefore, some commentaries say, oh, it makes sense. It makes sense that Moses doesn't lead the song, because how did they find out about the Amorites lying in wait? It's because the next day, the water from the well of Miriam that was traveling with them merged into the Arnon River, and it kind of showed the body, the blood and the limbs of the Amorite soldiers that were lying in wait. So it was the well water. So if Moses would have sang a song about the well, it would be a little too close to home and a little too bitter, sweet, or maybe just bitter for him. Not bittersweet, but bitter, because he was the one that got his entry into Israel got banned because he hit that very rock that then produced water for that well that revealed the miracle of Arnon. So for him to lead the song about the well would probably be a little painful, because like he's going to sing the praises of this well of water that got him in trouble. Like it's too complicated. So therefore he didn't lead this song. That's a second interpretation. You guys with me on this? Right. One interpretation is that he wasn't involved in the miracle any more than anyone else wasn't involved. No one was involved. God took care of it, and he didn't even lift the staff. Like he didn't do anything. Second answer is that Moses actually had a kerfuffle with the well. So therefore he's not gonna start singing its praises. Okay. Fine. So those are two reasons. So I mean, honestly, what we've done is we've answered all the questions what we've asked. We told a great story about an ambush. I even told a horrible joke about an ambush and bacon tree. Mark, remind me, I'll tell it to you later. Right. So we had a joke. I gave you a little 1956 Israeli history with the Mitla Pass in the Sinai Desert in Egypt. We talked about the miracle that happened and the fact that you should let people know when you give them a miracle, the fact that we should be grateful for the miracles that we can't see, but we believe that every step of the way is a miracle. God is paving our way. We spoke about two questions about why sing in these two cases, well, why sing in two specific instances. And we explained because you sing when something truly magnificent happens that you don't even have to lift a finger for, the splitting of the sea and this miracle over here. We said that this miracle is even greater than splitting the sea because the Jews didn't even have to panic. We weren't even stressed. We had no idea. What did we know about? There was no stress. There was no effort. There was nothing. God took care of it, easy peasy. And we asked the question, why didn't Moses lead the song? We gave two answers. Either number one, because Moses he didn't lead the charge here. God took care of it. Number two, because Moses got in trouble with the very well that they were singing to. Okay, great. I think we're good. However, we need to press further, because at the end of the day, as I said before, Moses was a great songwriter, right? He knew how to write songs, and he wrote an 18 verse song of the sea. And so why is it that despite the fact, he didn't lead this one, he didn't helm this miracle, he didn't quarterback the miracle, nor did he have the greatest experience around the rock. But you know what a leader does? A leader steps up even when things are a little uncomfortable, even when it's a little bit tense. Right? A leader steps up and does what's needed. Moses was the leader. He was the songwriter. Why didn't he compose one final musical for the 40-year Odyssey? Right, the desert or the wilderness Odyssey, the musical. Why didn't he compose one final score, one final musical, one final song in God's praises for this moment? And to answer this, I'm going to go a little bit deeper into the story of Moses hitting the rock. I mentioned before, really just a few moments ago, that when Miriam, his sister, passed away, the water stopped flowing from the rock and the well ceased. The people panicked. They went to Moses, who went to God. God said, speak to the rock. But instead, Moses hit the rock. And you might be wondering, if God said, speak to the rock, why did Moses hit the rock? And so there's one more detail that I think so often is overlooked. Text 7a. I want to read this. This is going to come, I think, as a bit of a surprise. Take a look at text 7a. Here's a quote, a verse from the book of Exodus. This is shortly after the Exodus from Egypt. And the people likewise, this is 40 years before. So that now it's a flashback, right? Now this is 40 years prior. The people have just left Egypt and they have no water. Here's what God tells Moses 40 years earlier. Strike the flintstone. I don't know why they did that. Strike the rock and water will emerge from it and the nation will drink. What does God tell Moses 40 years prior to do with the rock?
Yeah.
Strike the rock. So now you're thinking what I'm thinking, and I'm sure you are. 1 second. Moses messed up. God was being inconsistent. God was giving mixed messages. At the beginning of the 40 years, God says to Moses, hit the rock, you'll get water. And now at the end of 40 years, God says, speak to the rock. And then when Moses hits the rock, what happens? He gets in trouble. Come on. The last time he had hit the rock, maybe he was on autopilot. I mean, right? You kind of revert back to the previous thing. He probably remembered how there was a rock and he took his staff and he hit the rock and out came water. And for 40 years, it's worked. And so now God says, speak to the rock. He probably thinks, speak to the rock, hit the rock. I'm sure you meant hit, and he hits it again. And now he's punished. He can't go into Israel because he hit the rock. He hit the rock because he was told last time to hit the rock. Now, I know this time he wasn't, but come on, give the guy some slack. Why did the commandments change from God? So take a look at this. And I'm about to share with you two commentaries that are literally mind-blowing. Text 7b. This is back to our Torah portion. Talk to the rock. The passage does not say strike the rock, as it did 40 years prior. God was telling Moses, listen to this line. When students are young, the teacher is sometimes required to restrain them to teach them to avoid danger. Once they grow older, they can only be taught with words. And the word restrain, I don't know if that's an accurate translation. I think the accurate translation would not be okay in 2024. But the point is like this. When the child is young, sometimes you have to use harsher measures of discipline. Why? Because they're young, they don't know. You got to use, I'm not necessarily advocating, this is not a parenting class, this is not a pedagogy class, but this is what the measure is saying. That when kids are young, sometimes you have to be a little bit more forceful with them. But when they're older, force doesn't work. You got to speak to them. The beginning of the 40-year journey, the Jewish people had just gotten out of Egypt. They were a band of slaves that were just tasting freedom. And at this point, they needed a little bit of, shall we say, direction. And not just direction. They needed some, God says to Moses, hit the rock and it's going to produce water. In other words, how are you going to get results? You're going to have you got to be tough with them. You got to be tough. That's what they understand. That's what you got to be tough. At the end of the 40 years, God says to Moses, speak to the rock. 40 years later, you gotta work with the other in a different way. They've changed, and you as a leader have to change also. They've evolved, you have to evolve. If you're still relating to your 40-year-old child, if you're still relating to your 45-year-old child as you are your 5-year-old child, that's not good parenting, right? They've changed, you have to change. So God tells Moses, I know 40 years ago I told you to strike the rock to produce water, but today I'm telling you, 40 years later, you can speak to the rock and have the same effect. And in fact, if you can have the same effect by speaking to the rock as you would by hitting the rock, then you have no permission to hit the rock. Right? You with me on this? If you can get the results using pleasant, diplomatic means, etc., so then who's allowing any other use of harsher measures? It's simply this. Do we approach things in a harsh way or in a loving way? And I think that by and large, we say always approach in a loving way. But when a child is young and they do something wrong, sometimes you got to discipline. But if you try to ground your 20-year-old, your 19-year-old son who's at home, if you try to ground them or whatever it is, or 21-year-old son, they might not listen to you, right? What works with a little kid doesn't necessarily work for a bigger kid. You have to evolve. You have to adapt. You have to know your audience. And by that time, they should be capable of understanding your words, of appreciating the values that you're transmitting, not through harsh means, or you have to do what I say, clean your room or else, without the threats. You should be able to communicate in a way of positivity and values and encouragement because they have matured. God told Moses the same thing. 40 years later, we're not hitting rocks anymore. We're speaking to rocks. And when Moses hits the rock, you know what it almost indicates? What it almost indicates is that he can't relate to the new generation, or that he hasn't evolved as a leader. And I don't mean this in any way to disrespect Moshe, but the way the pieces of this puzzle come together based on the commentaries is that he was still relating to them 40 years later as he did 40 years prior, which means that he hadn't changed, to which God says, I see. You're still the leader of that original generation. You're not ready to move forward with this new generation. And that's fine, because not every leader is capable of leading the next generation. Sometimes, and I'm not trying to get into politics, but sometimes you got to pass the torch because you can't relate to the next generation. Sometimes it's okay to recognize that, you know what, my people were those people. That's who I know. That's who I led. Those are the ones that I helped mold. And this new generation that has a new way of doing things, maybe I'm a little out of touch. Maybe I can't relate. And therefore, it's okay that I pass the torch to Joshua. Is it a punishment, or is it a natural, not even a consequence, or is it just something so obvious that God says, oh, you still are striking the rock? Got it. Okay. I understand what's going on.
It depends how it's delivered. He delivered it. God delivered it as a punishment, it seems to me.
Yeah, but there's always ways to, Tov was asking, it sounds like God is saying, aha, got you, Moses, you're out. Yeah, but I think that's up to how we read interpretation. The simple understanding, and not simple, but this way of understanding it is God says to Moses, all right, I see. Your head is still stuck 40 years in the past. You're still stuck with the generation where you hit rocks to produce water. I mean, look, I think we've seen an evolution. I don't want to put you on the spot here, but when you were a kid, were they in school, if a kid acted out, did they ever physically discipline kids in school? Was that ever a thing?
Actually, they did.
Of course. Yeah. I'm not and just to be very clear here, I am not advocating this whatsoever. I, in my school career, never had that. In 2024, that is unheard of. And I think it reflects this paradigm. Back in the day, coming from wars, coming from the shtetl, coming from places of brokenness, you respond in that way. I mean, think about the older generation of parenting and what it looked like versus modern parenting. And one could say, the good old days were better. That's neither here nor there. What I'm saying is that at a certain point, there is an evolution, and it's a necessary evolution. You got to be able to communicate, to be able to impact, to influence the one that you're trying to influence. Okay, so getting back to the story, I want to share. Yes.
Look, reading my Rashi, I see a few more things if I can speak what Rashi says and some of the commentators. First, it says there wasn't one rock. Rashi says because the rock went and settled itself among other rocks. So when the well departed, so Moses wasn't sure which rock it was.
Right.
And it says he tried talking to the wrong rock and nothing happened. And I think what happened is God decided Moses may not be the best leader when they enter Israel, because then it says the people said, what did it say? They spoke to it. Okay, the people said it did not bring forth water, and so the people said maybe it is necessary to strike the rock, as it says, referring back to Exodus. You had to strike the rock. So in other words, Moses might have been a little too easygoing, a little too much, too flexible. not to go strictly by God's word, but the people said, strike, maybe you need to strike the rock.
Right. I hear you. Look, I'll tell you this.
No, it's not me, it's Rashi.
No, so not always all the commentaries have the same perspective. Right. It seems to me, and I'm obviously not discounting Rashi, but the angle that we're taking that is a little bit different, which is fine. But we often do Rashi. Sometimes we go a little bit different direction. But I want to share with you that this is not just the Yalkut Shimoni Midrash. This is also in the Alshach, Torah Moshe. Take a look what he writes. When the Jews were in Rephidim, their commitment, this is text 7c. When the Jews were in Rephidim, their commitment to the Torah grew slack. That's 40 years prior. The spiritual consequence was that they ran out of water, the spiritual symbol of the Torah. God wanted to teach them that people in their spiritual infancy, new to the path of Torah, sometimes require physical restraint. You gotta be tough. They might not take up their slack, allow the flow of their spiritual water unless physically compelled to do so. God indicated this by instructing Moses to make the flintstone give water by striking it. Similarly, the people might require physical restraint to embrace the Torah, which is often compared to water. This is the manner of teachers with young students who are about to get into trouble, ... Right? Okay. Again, this is written in the 1500s, and the educational model was perhaps the way it looked, as you can imagine, in the 1500s. Okay. However, 40 years later, when they were in the desert of Kadesh, they had spiritually matured and embraced the yoke of the Torah. Therefore, a verbal reminder would have sufficed to help them avoid their spiritual pitfalls. God implied this by instructing Moses to talk to the stone, and it would give its water. Again, just the same thing as we said before. If you can get the water by speaking to it, you have no permission to strike it. This explains why Moses struck the rock. He was still relating to them as he had 40 years prior. This explains why the consequence was that Moses wouldn't lead them into the land of Israel. And this also explains why, in the final analysis, Moses was not directly involved with this miracle. You see, in this situation, the miracle happens in a way where, in the past, Moses was on one level and the people were on a way lower level. And thus, as the one in charge, he had to be tough with them. But 40 years later, and we have some readings that we may or may not do, 40 years later, 40 years is a significant time. It says that after 40 years, one arrives at the level of their master, of their teacher, intellectually, but also spiritually. After 40 years of traversing the wilderness, 40 years of challenge and adversity, and triumph over that challenge and adversity, the people had elevated. And now you no longer see the gap between Moses and the Jewish people. In other words, by the miracle at Arnon, they all find out about the miracle at the same time. Moses doesn't find out about it earlier. Moses doesn't lead the charge with the miracle. It's not Moses who's facilitating the miracle or making the magic happen. God makes it happen. And the Jewish people and Moses find out about it at the same time. Thus, the Torah is almost equalizing. Not that you don't need a Moses still, you still need a leader. Leaders are important. But it's almost like the people have kind of bridged the gap between where they are and Moses. And Moses didn't fully recognize that, but he did embrace that. And he recognized that it's not up to him to sing the song. It's not up to him to not to compose the song, because the people now have the spiritual maturation, the spiritual maturity. Just like they deserve to be spoken to and not struck, so too they have the ability now to compose their own song. 40 years prior, at the splitting of the sea, Moses had to write the song that they would repeat. Now they can write the song. And yes, I said it before, and it's still true. Moses' song was 18 verses. Their song was 3 verses. He wrote a more expanded song. Fine. But they were on the path to spiritual maturity, and they were catching up. They were advancing. And thus, a good leader doesn't remind the people that they're still superior to them. A good leader empowers the other to rise up, even if it's not exactly on the level that they would do it themselves. It's almost like Moses, after striking the rock and recognizing that he should have spoken to the rock, he takes a step back and says, you know what? I have to have more faith in my people. I have to believe in them a little bit more. And I have to give them a little bit more ownership over this mission. And if that means me stepping back and allowing them to lead the song, then that is what they deserve, and that's what I must do. And I really want to conclude by connecting this with the leadership model that the Rebbe showed us. 30 years after Gimel Tammuz, anytime on a yard site, yard site is the day of a person's passing, and a person passes away on the day that their life's mission is complete. So a day like today, it's 30 years, celebrating, really commemorating, and on some level celebrating the life and legacy of the Rebbe. And Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who we love quoting in these classes, he famously said that most leaders create followers, but the Rebbe created leaders. Like most leaders, what they're followers. So, and it's very clear who's who, right? There's the leader and then there's the followers. But the Rebbe wanted nothing more than for all of us to be leaders. He said, go out and be an influencer. This is before that term meant what it means today, right? But be a shliach. He said everyone should be a shliach, not just the Chabad rabbis and rebbitzins with a formal capacity, but every Jew, every human being can be an influencer. Make an impact on your surroundings, make an impact on the individuals that you meet. It doesn't have to be so huge. When you meet somebody, smile, say something positive, encourage them to do a mitzvah, whatever it is on their level, but make a difference, and then encourage them to pass it forward. And in this way, the world becomes a better place. But also in this way, you collapse the gap almost between the leader and the people. Because if everybody's an influencer, if everybody is contributing to the cause, then everybody is on the same page. And the goal, obviously, is not to diminish the role of a leader, the role of a Moshe, the role of a Rebbe, but it's really to say that the greatest leaders are those that empower their followers. The greatest teachers are those that empower their students. The greatest parents are those that empower their children. And so I think we take a lesson from this week's Torah portion. The lesson from the song at Arnon, where Moses very conspicuously, I think I'm saying it correct, right? Conspicuously does not lead the song. And the message is because 40 years later, the people have caught up in a certain sense, and Moses is empowering them to take the lead at this point. And I think this is true for all of us. Let's, when we raise our children, let's raise them to stand up on their own 2 feet. If we're teaching others, let's enable them to study and to grow on their own. And in any form of leadership, that the greatest mark of a leader is when they have inspired others to stand on their own 2 feet and be able to contribute on their own to the world at large. So I think this speaks very closely to the message and the life and legacy of the Rebbe. And we see here, 30 years later, Chabad is thriving. The impact of Chabad houses and centers and organizations, the impact is exponentially greater than 30 years ago. And it's a testament to, any group or any organization or movement, whatever you want to call it, that is based on the leader. If the leader's gone, everything falls apart. I think the truth that we see about Chabad is that the Rebbe really created a movement and didn't make it about him, and said it's about the mission, it's about the cause. And what's the mission? It's God's mission. It's to make the world a better place, literally to do more mitzvahs and bring more light into the world. And that is a timeless message, and one that we can all commit to. So again, just repeat what I said at the beginning of the class. On this day, let us commit to study more Torah, to pray a little bit more, and to give more tzedakah, Torah, tefillah, and tzedakah, the famous 3 pillars that spiritually sustain the world. And indeed, when we soon experience the time when all darkness will fade and only light and spirituality and godliness will reign over the entire world. Let us say, Amen. Amen. Thank you for joining me tonight. Open for questions. I did a lot of talking tonight, and this is like a very big monologue, but let's, any questions or comments, break it out. Mark, I appreciate you breaking up the monologue earlier, a few minutes ago.
Sorry.
Any questions? Yeah. Oh, that someone says it. Any questions, comments?
I'll ask you later.
Okay. Reflections, poems, songs. All right. Good. Made sense? Yeah. All right. at least that.
Makes
Good.
sense, Rabbi. How did Rabbi Raleigh do over the weekend?
Oh, he was fantastic. Rabbi Raleigh was fantastic. Yeah. He spoke Friday night. He taught a class Shabbos morning. He taught a second class Shabbos morning. He gave the keynote at lunch. And then he delivered the main talk Sunday morning as well. He did the, what is that, the quadfecta or the quintfecta? I don't know how many fectas there are here, but he did the whole shebang, and he did great. Rabbi Raleigh Resnick from Chabad of the Tri-Valley. Wait, how far? I think we spoke about this, but is that close to you?
Well, yeah, I'm about equal distance to Rabbi Shmuley's Danville Center, and the same with Rabbi Raleigh. I went to
Nice.
Rabbi Raleigh's for 18 years,
Oh,
and so I know them, and I know went to the brisses and various events, bar mitzvahs and all that. So I'm acquainted with the family. I mean, we're not personal where we meet them in other than the shul or events. But I went to his first Passover, that when he
nice.
moved here, when he was practically a teenager. But he's a
Yeah.
very dynamic
Yeah.
individual, and had he been a CEO of a major corporation, it would be very successful.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I agree 100%. He told some great stories. As I'm sure you know, his father was one of the personal physicians of the Rebbe for many years,
Right.
and he spoke about that and their close relationship, and really very impactful. So listen, a day of inspiration, and the main thing is to translate inspiration to action. So on any level, on every level, let's do more goodness and kindness in the world, and hopefully get over the hump of whatever we're stuck in to bring Mashiach. All right. I'll say bid farewell to everybody. Kay and Ray and Faye. I'm not even doing this necessarily in that order, but it turns out that's what we got. Vlad, Danny, Mark, Larry, and Mrs. Friedman as well. Good to see you. And Lisa and David and Susan and Jeff and Diane, Dr. Maxey. It's great to see you guys. And Toba. Lila Tov.
Lila Tov, Yashakoach.
See you soon.